Hello, this is Dana Arcuri, author, speaker, survivor, and advocate. Today we are going to talk about 15 covert traits of a dysfunctional family. And so I always like to start off my videos by first educating about the definition of what I'm talking about. And so today I found this quote on Wikipedia.com in which they defined a dysfunctional family. So here we go. A dysfunctional family is a family in which conflict, misbehavior, and often child neglect and abuse on the part of the parents occur continuously and regularly, leading other family members to accommodate such actions. Oftentimes, children grow up in such a toxic environment in their dysfunctional family in which they may grow up thinking that this abuse and dysfunction is normal. So this is very, very common, especially in the abuse community. A healthy family, okay, so we're gonna switch it over now. Now let's talk about a healthy family because it's so important that we understand dysfunctional versus functional. Okay, so here we go. A functional, healthy family will encourage all family members to respect one another, to be seen, to be heard, to be validated without fear of rejection, criticism, retaliation, emotional abandonment, and repeated corporal punishment. And so the case is that most children who are brought up in a dysfunctional family, they are terrified, they fear for their lives, they discover in a very short amount of time, some of these young children, we're talking babies and toddlers, then they become, kindergarten students and young elementary school students, but they find out very, very quickly that if they speak out, if they share something, maybe it's that their big brother is a bully, they will be shamed, they will be blamed, they will be repeatedly abused and told that they're the problem and they need to just be quiet. And so it's a learned experience in which these young children grow up learning to just not discuss what is happening under the roof of their house. A wonderful, inspiring quote by Marcia Strata says, "In troubled families, abuse and neglect are permitted. It's the talking about them that is forbidden." And so what we see are many different roles that take place in a dysfunctional family. So you might have one or more parents who is very codependent and narcissistic. You may have one parent who looks the other way and they have a blind eye on what is happening under the roof of their home. So typically, this is so very common that we see this often. Usually someone will say that either A, their mother was the narcissist and their father just kind of gave a blind eye to what was happening inside the home, or we switch roles and now it's the father who's a narcissist and the mother was just kind of deaf and blind and pretended that everything was just peachy. And so we can understand that there's many different roles people play. This is my own thoughts on the roles of the dysfunctional family. So you have at least one parent who is codependent, and maybe they're even a peacemaker. Then you have the other one who's an absolute raging monster. They're a lunatic. They have a lot of anger management problems, and that is the narcissistic parent. Then you have the various siblings. They didn't ask for these labels, but somehow it just happened that certain children within the family had somehow landed in this spot, very uncomfortable spot. And so each part that they play, they didn't choose it, and yet this is what happens. And so you can have the golden child, and you can have the forgotten child, and you can have one child, at least one in the family, who's the big bully. And then you have the scapegoat. And some people like to call the scapegoat the black sheep of the family. Now, the one thing I wanted to say is there's some families that end up having division. Maybe the parents divorced. Maybe different people went in separate directions for whatever reason, or maybe there was a death. Maybe one parent died, and then maybe the mother or the father remarried, and then there's all these new roles that you're playing. So understand this is the dynamics within a dysfunctional family. And what happened in my family. So there was a very quick divorce. I was 2 years old. And in my mom's side of the family, meaning my mom is parenting us kids, there was a golden child. But very interestingly, when my father had us children, and say we were visiting him, and keep in mind it was a very rare occasion, I only saw my father. If I was lucky, I saw my father at least a few days or a week out of an entire year. Yes, he was a stranger. However, what I noticed is with my father, the person who was the golden child was not the same golden child of my mother. So roles can be flip-flopped, and there could be different roles that are played. Okay, here's another ironic incident that I ended up being the scapegoat of both. So whether it was when I was with my dad or when I was with my mom, I somehow ended up being the family scapegoat. And so typically a scapegoat in most cases will always be the scapegoat. Typically the forgotten child will also, and both, if your family does split and then there's a remarriage, and say your mom got married again and now you have a stepdad, and then maybe their step siblings on board, it could be that the forgotten child and the scapegoat, they're still the same. It could still be going on, and that's the one role I noticed that kind of seems to have the same pattern. Okay, now we're going to talk about the 15 covert traits of a dysfunctional family, and I could probably give you an hour's worth of information because I come from a toxic dysfunctional family. I have so much to bring to this conversation from personal hands-on experience, but I kept it to 15 traits. All right, so here we go. The first trait is the code of silence. Shh, don't say anything. You know, that whole thing on, oh, don't talk about it. So a common trait of a dysfunctional family is this unspoken code of silence in which the siblings and the children, you know, we all grow up knowing you best not say anything. You best be on your really good behavior when you're out with the family, or you're visiting your grandparents, or you're at church, or you go out to dinner, or whatever the situation could be. You are told to never, ever spill the beans about the family. And so what happens is that if we are in this code of silence, and we know not to speak, not to discuss what's happening, no matter how sinister, no matter how abusive and evil it is, we learn to be quiet. And then we add a dash of gaslighting with a heaping of shame. And let's not forget a teaspoon of manipulation. And this becomes a very toxic recipe for emotional trauma and abandonment. Next would be number 2, loyalty to the abusers. So in a dysfunctional family, there's these really bizarre expectations that you stay loyal to the parent who's actually abusing you. So say it's your narcissistic father, there's this unspoken code that you're supposed to stay loyal to him even if he's beating you up. And vice versa, if it's your mother or sibling or whoever it may be who is crossing the lines and they are harming one or more children. Next would be that there's a lot of triangulation within relationships inside that dysfunctional family. And I personally experienced it in many different capacities in such severe cases. I am talking brainwashing. So I was raised in an environment that was so lethal and poisonous and suffocating that I grew up to believe the words of my narcissistic mother. So at a very young age, when she started drilling into me over and over, day after day, night after night, month after month, decade after decade, that my father didn't love me or care about me, I believed her. So oftentimes children, they're so young, they're so naive, they're so vulnerable, and whatever the narcissistic parent says, they believe it because they don't know otherwise. I mean, come on, innocent children, they are just such vulnerable prey, and it is so heart-wrenching to watch this, but yet it happens in so many dysfunctional homes. So there may be triangulation between you and your siblings, triangulation between the mother and the father, triangulation between your grandparents, between your aunts, your uncles, your cousins, your neighbors, the community. You know, it could get to a point where it could actually like bleed into your friendships, going to school, going to college, your work relationships, where it ends up that if you are in a small town and a lot of people know each other, before you know it, there's all this triangulation of relationships happening within your own community. And so you might be in the grocery store and you hear people behind your back whispering about you, and you realize that, yes, whether it was the toxic sibling, whether it was one of the narcissistic parents or whoever it could have been, some cases it's all of the above, and you realize that they're all gossiping about you, they're all talking about you, and they are absolutely vicious, emotional vampires. Next would be number 4, and that is that in the dysfunctional family unit, we must understand that these children were never taught to have healthy boundaries. So they lack healthy boundaries, and instead of having these healthy boundaries, they have nothing. They have nothing to protect them. They have nothing to rescue them. They have no voice. They are invisible, and oftentimes they feel extremely lonely and isolated. Next would be jealousy. So it's very common in these unhealthy family dynamics that one or more sibling will become very envious and very jealous and mean-spirited towards at least one or more other siblings. Now, of course, every family is different. There could be the family that has only one child. That really changes the whole family dynamics. Then there's the other family, they might have 5 kids, 10 kids. There's some families, they're so large, it just adds to the complication of having such an abusive home environment. But what happens is that these siblings and family members can become extremely mean and say things that are harmful and hurtful and manipulative and absolute lies. I mean, they could say things like the fat shaming or saying, you're no good, you'll never amount to anything, and you're just a bum. There's so much name calling and criticisms, and all of this is really rooted in jealousy. And if we really look into jealousy, it is very, very sinister and dark, and there's nothing good that can come from a spirit of envy or jealousy. Next would be a family secret. Oh, we're back to being silenced again. Here we go again. And so this is what happens. It just is repeated over and over. Shh, code of silence. Don't talk about it. Oh, don't talk about the family secrets. So what happens is, say you end up going to a community carnival and you're together with your family. Everything could be on the outside. It could look good. Like your family's so intact and everything's fun and everything's great and everyone's happy and everyone plays their role and they put on their act like everything's fine. The only one who may really have a hard time with this is one, the family bully may act out and be actually misbehaving at the carnival. And then the forgotten child might get lost at the carnival. And the scapegoat is pretty much manipulated and scolded, and they already know they better just keep quiet, because if not, they might get beat, and they might just get slapped in public even. So there's a lot of different things that can come down with that situation. It's like this elephant in the room. So say even as an adult, you have this big holiday, and now there's, the cousins and the aunts and the uncles and the grandparents and the nieces and nephews and, all the different siblings, and now they're married and they have kids, and you might be married and you might have children. So it becomes this big family. And what happens is, even as adults, there's this big elephant in the room where nobody's talking about what's happening. That there might be, Uncle Ben who raped cousin Sally, and, well, Uncle Bob's just drinking a little too much gin. And poor Aunt Vicky, she is being manipulated left and right from Grandpa, who wants to keep her silent because there's some dark things going on behind closed doors. And so what happens is that there are family secrets, and it gets ridiculous because the family code is not to talk about it. And that is one of the biggest problems in dysfunctional families, is silence. So speak up, speak out, be a truth seeker. Next is number 7. So it's domestic violence. Now, domestic violence goes hand in hand with the dysfunctional family. There might be a lot of calls to 911. The dad might be beating up the mother or the children or what have you. It could be that there's a lot of violence in the home. It could be that there's incest. There could be physical abuse, mental abuse, spiritual abuse, sexual abuse, and on and on and on. And it is just a hot mess. Next is number 8. And that is that most, now not all, but most of the family members, such as the narcissist, the codependent parent, the bully child, and the toxic siblings, and also the golden child, they have no empathy. So it seems like the only one in the family who has empathy and compassion is the scapegoat. So the scapegoat somehow became the scapegoat mainly because they are an empathic person. They are an authentic person. They are someone who is very kind-hearted, who is loving, who is compassionate. Typically, they love animals. Typically, they are a people pleaser. Now, that is something through time that they may grow to learn, that people pleasing is only hurting them. Then they may set up some boundaries and things can really improve for them. But we have to understand that empathy is something that most of the members of the family will never ever have. And instead, they are just cruel, outspoken, extremely heartless groups of people who attack the scapegoat. Next could be that there's unrealistic expectations, and it could be one or more parent. And it could be even a caregiver, because sometimes people have grandparents that end up becoming like the caregiver, depending on what happens and what's going on in that family unit. So the caregiver could be just about anyone, and it could include someone who's not even your relative. But what happens is that they have these unrealistic expectations in which they are a perfectionist, and they expect you to have perfect behavior, perfect grades in school, perfect appearance, perfect teeth, perfect smell, perfect attitude. Everything about you must be totally in place, or else you will be smacked and put into your place. And so what happens is it's such an unrealistic expectation for a parent to think that every child is going to be on the honor roll and every child is going to be super athletic or popular or what have you. There's so many stereotypical things that these parents expect. They want your son to be the football player, and they want the daughter to be the beautiful cheerleader, and they want the other child to be this wonderful, perfect straight A student. And if they get a B, they come home with a B, which is a very great, wonderful grade, above average, and yet the parent will criticize them, will tell them they're stupid, They may punish them. There may be violence involved. And this child grows up feeling so unworthy when they actually are accomplishing great things in life, such as getting a B on a test and grades and so forth. So we have to understand that these unrealistic expectations are so hurtful, and it's also part of abuse. Next is number 10, and that is the over-controlling parent and even some siblings who somehow are control freaks who are on a power trip. So what they want to do is they want to control certain people within the family, especially the person who's the black sheep of the family and the scapegoat. They want to control you, your mind, how you eat, what you eat, when you eat, how you dress, how you wear your hair, the friends you have, the friends you don't have, what you say, what you do, every single move you make. They're manipulative. It is absolutely horrendous how controlling these toxic family dynamics are that really, really harm and traumatize young children. Next would be number 11. So dysfunctional families have non-stop criticism. There's a lot of name calling, a lot of cussing and verbal and mental abuse. There's bullying, gaslighting, manipulation, and harsh judgments. So if this family ends up being over the top religious, beware, because there might also be religious gaslighting that happens and rules that are just sometimes really difficult to live up to those high expectations. Sometimes families have these rules where they use the Bible as a weapon to beat down these young kids, and it's another form of spiritual abuse. Next will be number 13. So another trait of a dysfunctional family is an unsafe home environment. Most of these children across the board. So whether it is the golden child, whether it is one of the children who is a bully or the forgotten child or the family scapegoat, they are terrified. They know exactly how unsafe they are. They understand that at any moment, at the click of a finger, something horrible is going to happen, and they are going to be harshly punished. And there's just such a lethal environment. It's almost like this heavy, heavy cloak of oppression. And this heavy, dark cloak of oppression is silencing these children. And the energy within that home environment is so toxic. It's so heavy. It's suffocating. And the poor children cannot manage on their own under this type of unsafe, abusive, evil, oppressed environment. Next is number 14. So another sign of a dysfunctional family is that there's a lack of proper and adequate supervision of the children. So anyone who is under 18 years old typically would be supervised, especially anyone who's under the age of 10. You would really expect a parent to step up to the plate, to be a good parent, to supervise babies and toddlers and preschoolers and little elementary school kids and even junior high school kids and high school kids. I mean, hey, come on, each one comes with their own things that can happen and the challenges of parenting. And so we have to understand that supervision is vital in a healthy, functional home, and yet it's missing in the dysfunctional home unit. So there is typically very minimal to no supervision. And that is why there could be one bully sibling who is beating up all the other kids, who is mean. They might be putting their fist through the wall. There could be a lot of destruction and damage to the home. This is also very common. Again, there's violence, there's physical violence, and that means destruction of property. There could be windows that are broke. There could be some really unhealthy situations that are happening inside this home that are involving corporal punishment. And the bottom line is that if these kids are not being adequately supervised, anything can happen, including sexual assault, all forms of violence, and even murder. So there's so much that can happen, and that's why families need to have supervised, tender, loving care for their children. Next would be number 15. So this is the last trait of a dysfunctional family. And so in a dysfunctional family, it is very common to at least have one or more parent who has a mental illness. So mental illness is very typical inside an abusive, toxic family. Typically, there's at least one parent and perhaps even one or more children who grow up then, of course, to have a mental illness. So it could be that the parent was never diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, or maybe the parent is sociopathic. Maybe the person has, one or more parent could have a personality disorder or what have you. And then if you add on top of it that there's at least one sibling who also might carry these same traits, there could be a narcissistic sibling who is the big bully in the family, the one who's always up to no good, always fighting with the other kids, constantly stirring up trouble. They're an instigator. And this is also something that we see in the dysfunctional family. And lastly, the big thing is, I think that we're seeing across the board is that most of these parents are not even diagnosed correctly. So I think that's a big problem going on in society is A, lack of education, B, lack of getting a correct diagnosis, and then C, that even if the person was diagnosed with a personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder, they're in denial, they claim it's not true, and they refuse to seek any form of treatment. And so this leaves the family again in a hot mess. It's just absolute three-ring circus making. And, the flying monkeys and the narcissist together cause so much havoc and so much hell and turmoil inside the dysfunctional family that a scapegoat is so fortunate when they get out, when they get free, when they go no contact. I mean, it is so liberating, my friends. I'm telling you, when you finally do escape this dysfunctional family like I have, and you're on the other side of recovery, I tell you, there is nothing more empowering, more liberating, more exciting than getting your life back. You're rebuilding your life, you find peace of mind, you speak up, and you start a fresh new pathway that could be very enjoyable and happy and healthy and loving. And so today, share with me, do you have a dysfunctional family? Maybe it's your in-laws. Maybe it's one of your siblings who is the narcissist. Share with me what roles your family members played. Are you still in contact with your toxic dysfunctional family? Or did you go gray rock? Did you go full no contact? And lastly, thank you so much for being a part of my YouTube channel. Like my video, subscribe to my channel, and share your own personal experiences. I'd love to hear from you. Have a beautiful day. Bye-bye, my friends.